Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead as he checked the sensor readings for the third time that morning. The research station on Kepler 442b had been his home for 6 months now, and he still wasn't used to the planet's thick, humid air. The massive jungle that stretched beyond the station's walls was alive with sounds he couldn't identify. Creatures that called and screamed and rustled through leaves the size of dinner plates. "Jake, you need to see this," called Dr. Lisa Park from the communications center. Her voice carried an excitement that made Jake drop his datapad and hurry over to where she stood, staring at the long-range scanner display. "What is it?" Jake asked, but even as the words left his mouth, he could see the answer on the screen. A ship was approaching, sleek and silver and unlike anything in the human fleet. It moved with a predatory grace that reminded Jake of the dangerous creatures that lived in the forests around their station. "It's them," Lisa whispered. "The Zephyrians. They're actually coming." Jake felt his heart rate increase. For months, the research team had been sending diplomatic messages into space, hoping to make contact with the alien species that Earth's deep space probes had detected. The Zephyrians had responded with brief, formal messages that were polite, but cold. Now they were here, and Jake realized he wasn't ready for this moment despite all their preparations. The alien ship landed with barely a sound in the clearing that the research team had prepared as a landing zone. Jake watched through the station's reinforced windows as a section of the ship's hull opened like a flower, revealing a ramp that extended to the ground. 3 figures emerged, moving with fluid grace that was both beautiful and somehow threatening. Jake had seen pictures of Zephyrians from the probe data, but seeing them in person was different. They were tall, nearly 7 feet, with lean bodies covered in scales that shifted from deep blue to silver as they moved. Their faces were angular and sharp, with large eyes that seemed to miss nothing. They wore form-fitting armor that looked more like a second skin than protective gear. The leader of the group was clearly female, though Jake had to remind himself that gender might not mean the same thing to her species as it did to humans. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who had never been challenged, never been afraid. Her scales were more silver than blue, and intricate patterns covered her arms and face like tattoos. "That's got to be their commander," Lisa said, standing beside Jake at the window. "Look at the way the other 2 follow her. She's in charge." Jake nodded, trying to calm his nerves. He had been chosen to lead the first contact mission not because he was the smartest person on the station, but because he was good with people. The problem was, these weren't people. These were aliens with technology that could probably destroy their entire station without breaking a sweat. The station's main door opened with a hiss, and Jake stepped outside with Lisa and 2 other team members. The Zephyrian leader approached them with measured steps, her large eyes taking in every detail of the humans before her. When she spoke, her voice was clear and precise, the words formed by a translator device that hung around her neck. "I am Commander Lyra Vex-9 of the Zephyrian Fleet. I come in response to your communications requesting diplomatic contact." She paused, her eyes focusing on Jake. "You are the leader of this group?" Jake stepped forward, fighting the urge to extend his hand for a handshake. The briefing materials had warned that many alien species might see such gestures as threatening. "I'm Dr. Jake Morrison. I'm the xenobiologist for this station, and I've been designated as the primary contact for this mission." Lyra's eyes narrowed slightly, and Jake wondered if he had said something wrong. "Xenobiologist," she repeated. "You study alien life forms." "That's right. I'm here to learn about the creatures that live on this planet, to understand how they interact with their environment." Jake tried to keep his voice steady and professional. "We're very interested in learning about your people as well, if you're willing to share." Lyra made a sound that might have been laughter, but there was no humor in it. "You study creatures." "How fitting," she gestured to the 2 Zephyrians behind her. "These are my subordinates, Tactical Officer Kren in Science. Officer Zuri will remain here for the duration specified in our communications. 4 weeks, no more." The way she said it made it clear that she considered this visit a waste of time. Something she was doing because orders required it rather than because she wanted to be here. Jake felt a sinking sensation in his stomach. The future of human Zephyrian. Relations might depend on the next 4 weeks, and their representative clearly thought humans weren't worth her time. "Would you like a tour of our station?" Jake offered. "We've prepared quarters for you and your team, and we have a lot of information about this planet that might interest you." Lyra nodded curtly. "That would be acceptable. But first I must ask about the security situation. Our sensors detected large predators in the area around your station. How do you protect yourselves?" Jake glanced at Lisa, who gave him an encouraging nod. "We have defensive systems, but honestly, we try to avoid confrontation with the local wildlife. The creatures here are incredibly dangerous, especially the ones we call shadow maws. They're the apex predators of this planet." "Apex predators?" Lyra repeated, and for the first time, Jake saw genuine interest in her eyes. "How large are these creatures?" "The adults can reach over 10 feet in length and weigh as much as a small vehicle. They have adaptive camouflage that makes them nearly invisible, claws that can cut through steel, and bite force that can crush reinforced concrete." Jake found himself warming to the subject. "They're incredible hunters, perfectly adapted to their environment." Lyra exchanged glances with her subordinates, and Jake caught a few words in their own language. The tone suggested surprise, maybe even respect. "And you simply avoid them?" she asked. "We try to. We have sensors that can detect their movement, and we've learned to recognize the signs that they're in the area. The forest goes quiet when they're hunting." Jake paused, wondering if he should admit the truth. "Honestly, if one of them wanted to attack this station, our defenses might not be enough to stop it. We're researchers, not soldiers." Lyra stared at him for a long moment, and Jake had the uncomfortable feeling that she was seeing right through him. "You admit weakness so easily. In my culture, such honesty would be seen as shameful." "In our culture, it's seen as wisdom," Jake replied. "We know our limitations. That's why we're here to learn, not to conquer." The Zephyrian commander made that sound again, the one that might have been laughter. "Learn, not conquer. How very human." She turned to her subordinates. "We will inspect the quarters you have prepared. Tomorrow you will show us your research data on these apex predators. I am curious to see how a species that admits its own weakness survives in the territory of creatures that could destroy them." As the aliens followed Lisa toward the stations. Main building, Jake remained outside for a moment, looking up at the alien ship that sat in their landing zone. He had hoped that first contact would go better than this. Lyra clearly thought humans were weak, and maybe she was right. But Jake had learned something important in his months on this planet. Sometimes the weak survived not by fighting, but by understanding. The forest around the station was quiet now, which meant the shadow maws were hunting. Jake shivered despite the warm air and went inside. He had 4 weeks to prove to Lyra that humanity was worth her people's time. Looking at the commander's cold, predatory eyes, he wondered if 4 weeks would be enough. 3 weeks had passed since the Zephyrians arrived, and Jake was beginning to think the mission was a failure. Commander Lyra attended all the required meetings and cultural exchanges, but she participated with the enthusiasm of someone doing paperwork. Her responses were polite but short, and Jake could see in her eyes that she had already made up her mind about humanity. The worst part was that Jake was starting to think she might be right. Compared to the Zephyrians, humans did seem weak and soft. Lyra could move without making a sound, her reflexes were lightning fast, and she had natural armor in the form of those beautiful scales. Her people had conquered dozens of worlds and built an empire that stretched across 3 star systems. What did humans have to offer? Jake asked himself this question every morning as he reviewed the day's research schedule. They were good at studying things, good at being curious, but that didn't seem like much when compared to the Zephyrian war machine on this particular morning. Jake was checking the perimeter sensors when he noticed something odd. One of the outer boundary markers was showing unusual readings, like something large had crashed in the forest about half a mile from the station. The readings were inconsistent. jumping between different energy signatures in a way that suggested damaged equipment. Jake pulled up the area map on his tablet. The crash site was right at the edge of Shadowmaw territory, a place where the research team never went on foot. It was probably just a piece of space debris, maybe a fragment from one of the old survey satellites. But protocol required someone to investigate. He found Lyra in the station's main lab, watching Dr. Lisa Park demonstrate how they analyze plant samples. The Zephyrian commander looked bored, her attention clearly elsewhere. When Jake explained about the unusual readings, Lyra barely glanced at his tablet. "Space debris falls on planets all the time," she said dismissively. "It is hardly worth our attention." "You're probably right," Jake agreed, "but I should check it out anyway. Safety protocols, you know." Lyra made that sound that might have been laughter. "Of course, humans and their protocols." "Very well, I will accompany you. Perhaps we will encounter one of these apex predators you speak of so often." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. The way Lyra said it suggested she was hoping for exactly that. He had seen her practice combat drills with her subordinates, and she moved like a predator herself. Maybe she wanted to test herself against one of the Shadowmaws. They took one of the station's hover bikes, a small vehicle that could carry 2 people and navigate through the dense forest without disturbing too much of the undergrowth. Jake drove while Lyra sat behind him, her weight distribution perfect and her balance never wavering even when they hit rough terrain. The forest was alive with sound today, which was a good sign. When the Shadowmaws were hunting, everything else went quiet. Jake could hear the calls of tree dwellers, the buzz of insects, and the distant splash of something large moving through a stream. It was the sound of a healthy ecosystem, one where the apex predators were sleeping or hunting somewhere else. They found the crash site easily enough. Something had definitely come down hard, carving a furrow through the trees and leaving a trail of scattered debris. But as they got closer, Jake realized it wasn't space junk at all. It was one of their own survey drones, a small automated unit that had been mapping the forest canopy. "This is one of ours," Jake said, climbing off the hoverbike. "It must have malfunctioned and crashed." Lyra followed him toward the wreckage, her hand resting casually on the weapon at her side. "Your technology is not very reliable?" Jake was about to respond when he heard it, a soft, whimpering sound coming from the twisted metal of the drone. It was a sound of pain, of something small and hurt and scared. He moved closer to the wreckage, and that's when he saw it, caught. In the twisted metal frame of the drone was a young Shadowmaw, barely larger than a house cat. Its fur was the same adaptive camouflage as the adults, but it was stuck in a pattern of distressed browns and grays that made it easy to see. One of its hind legs was trapped under a piece of the drone's sensor array, and Jake could see blood matting the fur around the injury. "By the stars," Lyra whispered, and Jake heard genuine surprise in her voice. "A juvenile apex predator." The cub looked up at them with large amber eyes that held intelligence and pain in equal measure. It tried to move when it saw them, but the effort only made it cry out again. Jake could see that it was badly hurt, probably dying. "You cannot be serious," Lyra said when she saw Jake moving toward the injured cub. "That creature will grow to be a killing machine. Its kind are the apex predators of this world. To help it is to endanger everyone on this station." Jake ignored her and knelt beside the wreckage. The cub watched him approach, its breathing fast and shallow. Up close, Jake could see that it was even more badly injured than he had first thought. There was a deep gash across its hindquarters, and the way it was breathing suggested internal damage. "This is madness," Lyra continued, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "In 3 years, maybe 4, this creature will be large enough to tear through your station's defenses. You would save something that will kill you." Jake began carefully moving pieces of the drone's wreckage, trying to free the cub's trapped leg without causing more damage. The young predator watched him with those intelligent eyes, and Jake had the strange feeling that it understood he was trying to help. "That's assuming it lives that long," Jake said, not looking up from his work. "Right now it's just a scared, hurt animal." "It is a predator," Lyra said firmly. Even as a juvenile, it is dangerous. Its claws can tear flesh, its bite can break bones. This goes against every evolutionary principle. The strong survive, the weak perish. You cannot change that by being kind to a creature that sees you as prey. Jake managed to lift the piece of metal that was trapping the cub's leg. The young Shadowmaw cried out as it was freed, but it didn't try to attack him. Instead, it seemed to collapse, too weak to do more than breathe. Jake could see that the leg was badly broken, and there were other injuries he couldn't immediately identify. Maybe that's where you're wrong, Jake said, carefully lifting the injured cub. It was heavier than he had expected, and he could feel the potential strength in its small body. Maybe survival isn't just about being strong enough to kill everything else. Maybe it's about being smart enough to know when not to. The cub made a soft sound, almost like a purr but deeper, and Jake felt it relax slightly in his arms. Lyra stared at them both, her expression unreadable. "This is either the most foolish thing I have ever witnessed," she said slowly, "or the most remarkable. I cannot decide which." Jake stood up, the injured cub cradled against his chest. "Help me. Get it back to the station. I think we can save it." Lyra was quiet for a long moment, studying Jake's face. Finally, she nodded. "Very well. But when this creature grows large enough to eat you, do not expect me to act surprised." They made the trip back to the station in silence, Jake holding the injured cub as gently as he could while Lyra drove the hoverbike. The young predator had stopped whimpering and seemed to be sleeping, though Jake could feel its labored breathing against his chest. As they approached the station, Jake realized that everything was about to change. He was bringing an apex predator into their home, and he had no idea what the consequences would be. But looking down at the small, injured creature in his arms, he knew he couldn't have made any other choice. Behind him, Lyra was thinking similar thoughts. In her culture, strength was everything, and the strong protected only their own kind. But she had just watched a human risk his life to save a creature that could someday kill him. It was either the act of a fool or the act of someone who understood. Strength in a way her people never had. She wasn't sure which, but she was beginning to think it might be the latter. Jake set up the medical bay in Storage Room 7, the largest unused space in the research station. Dr. Lisa Park helped him move equipment from the main medical facility, though she kept shaking her head and muttering about the stupidity of bringing a predator inside their home. "You know this is crazy, right?" Lisa said as she connected a diagnostic scanner to the power supply. "We're talking about a shadow maw. Even a baby one has claws that can cut through metal." Jake was preparing sedatives and antibiotics, his hands working automatically while his mind focused on the injured cub lying on the examination table. The young predator had woken up during the trip back to the station, and those amber eyes had watched Jake with an intelligence that was both fascinating and unsettling. "It's hurt," Jake said simply. "We can't just let it die." "Why not?" The question came from Lyra, who was standing in the doorway watching them work. "In the natural world, the weak die so the strong can survive. This is the way of things." Jake looked up from his preparations. "Maybe, but we're not in the natural world anymore. We're in a place where different rules can apply." The cub made a soft sound, somewhere between a whimper and a growl. Jake moved closer to the examination table, and the young predator's eyes followed him. When Jake reached out slowly, the cub didn't pull away. Instead, it seemed to lean into his touch as if seeking comfort. "Remarkable," Lyra murmured. "In all my years of military service, I have never seen a predator react this way to a potential prey species." Jake began examining the cub's injuries more carefully. The broken leg was the most obvious problem, but there were also deep cuts along its side and signs of internal trauma. The young predator would need surgery to repair the damage, and even then, there was no guarantee it would survive. "Lisa, I'm going to need you to assist with the surgery," Jake said. "This is going to be complicated." Lisa nodded reluctantly. "I'll help, but I want it on record that I think this is a terrible idea." As they worked, Jake became aware that Lyra was watching everything with intense interest. The Zephyrian commander had pulled up a chair and was observing their every move, her large eyes missing nothing. You performed surgery on a creature that could kill you, Lyra said. Why? Jake didn't look up from his work. Because it needs help? Because it's hurt and scared and alone? Those are not reasons a warrior would understand, Lyra replied. Warrior would see a potential threat and eliminate it before it could grow strong enough to be dangerous. The surgery took 3 hours. Jake had to set the broken leg, repair damaged organs, and close several deep wounds. Through it all, the young predator remained still under sedation, its breathing steady but weak. When it was finally over, Jake was exhausted but hopeful. It should live, he told Lisa, who was cleaning up the medical equipment. But it's going to need constant care for the next few weeks. And who's going to provide this care? Lyra asked. You? Jake nodded. I am. I'll sleep here, monitor its condition, make sure it has everything it needs to recover. Lyra stared at him for a long moment. You would sacrifice your own comfort for a creature that owes you nothing and may someday hunt you. It's not about debt, Jake said. It's about doing what's right. Over the next few days, Jake barely left the medical bay. He slept on a cot next to the examination table, waking every few hours to check on the cub's condition. The young predator, which Jake had decided to call Scout, began to recover slowly. The first sign of improvement came when Scout opened his eyes and looked around the room with curiosity instead of fear. The second came when Jake offered him small pieces of synthesized meat protein, and Scout actually ate them. But the most surprising development was the bond that began to form between human and predator. Scout would become calm when Jake was in the room and agitated when he left. The young shadow maw would make soft purring sounds when Jake spoke to him, a deep rumble that vibrated through the floor of the medical bay. This is unnatural, Lyra said one evening as they watched Scout play with a toy Jake had made from spare parts. Predators do not form attachments to other species. They use them or they eliminate them. Jake smiled, reaching out to scratch behind Scout's ears. The cub's purring grew louder, and he leaned into the touch. Maybe that's what makes us different. We don't just survive in nature, we make friends with it. Friends, Lyra repeated the word like it was foreign to her. You believe this creature sees you as a friend? As if to answer her question, Scout stood up on his still healing legs and walked over to where Jake was sitting. The young predator nuzzled against Jake's hand, then curled up next to him, his purring filling the room with a sound like distant thunder. I think he does, Jake said softly. Lyra watched this interaction with growing confusion. In Zephyrian culture, relationships were based on hierarchy and mutual benefit. The strong protected the weak only when it served their interests. But what she was seeing made no sense according to those rules. In my society, she said slowly, the strong lead and the weak follow. The leader provides protection and resources, and the followers provide service and loyalty. But what does this creature provide you? What do you gain from this relationship? Jake considered the question. I guess I gain the knowledge that I helped something that needed help. I gain the satisfaction of seeing Scout get better, and maybe I gain a friend. Friendship with a predator? Lyra said. My people would call this madness. What would they call it if the predator protected me in return? Jake asked. Lyra didn't answer, but Jake could see her thinking. Over the following days, she spent more and more time in the medical bay, watching Jake care for Scout and observing the growing bond between them. The young shadow maw had begun to follow Jake around the room, staying close to his side like a loyal pet, but Scout was growing. Even injured and recovering, he was gaining size and strength every day. His claws were getting longer, his teeth sharper, and his muscles more defined. In a few months, he would be large enough to be dangerous. In a year, he would be large enough to be deadly. Jake seemed unconcerned by this development. He continued to treat Scout with the same gentleness he had shown from the beginning, and the young predator responded with obvious affection. Scout would purr when Jake approached, would eat only when Jake was present, and would become distressed if Jake left the medical bay for too long. You are not afraid, Lyra observed one day as Jake checked Scout's healing wounds. This creature grows stronger every day, yet you show no fear. Jake looked up at her. Should I be afraid of my friend? Your friend has claws that can cut through? Metal and will soon have the strength to use them, Lyra pointed out. Your friend is a predator that could kill you without effort. Jake finished his examination and gave Scout a gentle pat. The young predator responded with a happy purr and rubbed against Jake's leg. But he won't, Jake said with quiet confidence. He knows I helped him. He trusts me, Lyra shook her head. Trust is not something that exists between predator and prey. It is not possible. But even as she said it, she was watching Scout curl up next to Jake's feet, the young predator's eyes closing in contentment. The scene before her challenged everything she believed about strength, survival, and the natural order of things. That night, alone in her quarters, Lyra composed a message to the Zephyrian High Command. She had been planning to recommend against any alliance with humanity, but now she found herself unable to write those words. Instead, she wrote about the strange relationship she was observing, the bond between human and predator that should not exist but clearly did. She ended the message with a single line. These humans may be more than they appear, recommend extended. Observation. Outside her window, she could hear the deep rumble of Scouts purring echoing through the station's walls. The sound followed her into sleep, where she dreamed of impossible friendships and strength that came not from conquest, but from compassion. 2 months had passed since Jake rescued Scout from the crashed drone. The young Shadow Maw had grown considerably during his recovery, now standing as tall as Jake's waist and weighing nearly as much as a grown man. His fur had regained its natural, adaptive camouflage abilities, and his wounds had healed completely, leaving only faint scars as reminders of his accident. Jake was in the medical bay giving Scout his morning feeding when the alarm began to sound. The piercing wail echoed through the station's corridors, causing Scout to raise his head and emit a low growl of confusion. Jake had never heard the young predator make that particular sound before, and it sent a chill down his spine. Dr. Lisa. Park's voice came over the communication system, tense with fear. Jake, you need to get to the control room right now. We have a situation. Jake gave Scout a reassuring pat and hurried to the main control center, where he found the entire research team gathered around the sensor displays. Lisa was pointing at the screen with a shaking hand, her face pale with worry. Long-range sensors picked them up about an hour ago, she said. 5 large heat signatures moving through the forest in formation. They're heading straight for us. Jake looked at the display and felt his stomach drop. The sensors showed 5 massive shapes moving with purpose through the dense jungle, each one larger than any Shadow Maw they had previously detected. The creatures were approaching the research station from different directions, but their paths would converge at the facility's perimeter. Adult Shadow Maws, Jake whispered. A full pack. Lyra appeared at his shoulder, studying the sensor data. With professional interest. They move with coordination and purpose. This is not random wandering. They are hunting something specific. As if responding to some unheard signal, Scout began making loud, calling sounds from the medical bay. The noise was unlike anything Jake had heard from the young predator before, a series of deep, resonant calls that seemed to vibrate through the station's walls. It was answered almost immediately by similar calls from the forest, much deeper and more powerful. Scout knows they're here, Jake said, understanding flooding through him. These aren't just any Shadow Maws. This is his family. His pack. The research team looked at each other with growing alarm. They had always known this moment might come, but knowing something intellectually and facing it in reality were two different things. The station's defenses were designed to keep out smaller predators and weather storms, not to withstand an assault from 5 adult apex predators. We need to go into full lockdown, Lisa said, her voice steady despite her obvious fear. Seal all the entrances, activate the perimeter barriers, and hope they give up and go away. But even as she spoke, the sensor readings showed the pack emerging from the tree line. Jake watched the display in fascination and terror as 5 massive shapes materialized from what had appeared to be empty forest. Their adaptive camouflage was perfect, making them nearly invisible until they chose to reveal themselves. The largest of the group, clearly the pack leader, approached the station's main entrance. Even through the reinforced walls, they could Hear her calling to Scout, a deep, powerful sound that spoke of loss and searching. Scout's responses became more frantic, and Jake realized the young predator was torn between two worlds. The pack leader is female, Lyra observed, watching the creature's movements with professional interest. Most likely the mother of your Scout. See how she moves with authority, how the others defer to her position. Jake nodded, his mind racing. She's been looking for him all this time. 2 months of searching for her missing cub. The mother shadow maw began circling the research station, her massive form moving with deadly grace. The other pack members took up positions around the perimeter, effectively surrounding the facility. They made no aggressive moves toward the building, but their intent was clear. They weren't leaving without their young Dot in the medical bay. Scout's agitation was growing worse. The young predator paced back and forth, alternately calling to his pack and looking toward the door that led to the rest of the station. Jake could see the conflict in Scout's amber eyes, the pull between his natural family and the human who had saved his life. You have to let him go, Lyra said quietly. The pack will not leave without their young. If you try to keep Scout, they will eventually find a way inside. Your defenses cannot hold against 5 adult shadow maws indefinitely. Jake knew she was right. The research station's barriers were strong, but they weren't designed to withstand a prolonged siege by creatures that could tear through reinforced metal with their claws. Sooner or later, the pack would break through, and when they did, everyone in the station would be in mortal danger. But what happens when I open the doors? Jake asked. Scout's pack doesn't know me. They don't know I helped him. All they'll see is the creature that took their young. Lyra was quiet for a moment, studying the sensor readings that showed the pack maintaining their positions around the station. In my experience, apex predators do not negotiate. They take what they want by force. Jake walked back to the medical bay, where Scout was becoming increasingly distressed. The young predator looked at him with those intelligent amber eyes, and Jake could see the question there. Scout understood that his family was outside, and he was asking Jake to let him go to them. I know, buddy, Jake said softly, kneeling down to Scout's level. I know you want to see them, but I'm scared of what will happen when I open those doors. Scout moved closer and nuzzled against Jake's hand, purring softly. It was the same gesture of affection he had shown countless times during his recovery, but now it carried a different meaning. It felt like gratitude, like goodbye. The pack continued their vigil outside the station as the hours passed. They made no attempt to breach the defenses, but their presence was a constant reminder that time was running out. Jake tried to focus on his normal duties, but his attention kept returning to Scout and the impossible decision he was facing. They're waiting, Lisa said during the evening briefing. The sensors show they haven't moved from their positions. In over 6 hours, they're just sitting out there watching. They know their young is inside, Lyra explained. They will wait as long as necessary. Shadow maws are patient hunters when they need to be. Jake spent that night in the medical bay with Scout, neither of them sleeping much. The young predator seemed to sense the gravity of the situation, staying close to Jake but constantly looking toward the sealed doors. Outside, the pack maintained their silent vigil. 5 massive shadows waiting in the darkness. As dawn approached, Jake made his decision. He couldn't keep Scout imprisoned while his family waited outside. The young predator belonged with his own kind, regardless of the personal cost to Jake or the danger to the research team. I'm going to take him out to them, Jake announced at the morning briefing. It's the only way to resolve this peacefully. The room erupted in protests. Lisa pointed out that the pack would likely attack him the moment he stepped outside. Other team members suggested alternative plans, from trying to sedate Scout to attempting to drive the pack away with sonic deterrence. But Lyra was quiet, studying Jake's face with those penetrating alien eyes. You would risk your life for a creature that no longer needs your protection? Jake nodded. Scout saved my life by trusting me when he was hurt and scared. Now, I need to trust him to remember that when he's with his family. This is either the bravest thing I have ever witnessed, Lyra said slowly, or the most foolish, perhaps both. Jake began preparing for what might be his final mission. He put on his environmental suit, not because he thought it would protect him from Shadowmaw claws, but because regulations required it. As he made his preparations, Scout watched him with growing excitement, seeming to understand that he was finally going home. The pack was still waiting when Jake and Scout approached the station's main airlock. Through the reinforced windows, Jake could see the Mother Shadowmaw rise to her feet, her massive form radiating power and potential violence. The other pack members moved closer, their attention focused entirely on the sealed door. Jake's hand hovered over the airlock controls, his heart pounding with fear and anticipation. In a few moments, he would step outside and face 5 of the most dangerous predators on the planet. With nothing but faith in a young Shadowmaw's memory to protect him, Scout looked up at him and made a soft, encouraging sound. It was the same purr he had made during his recovery, the sound of trust and affection. Jake took a deep breath and activated the airlock. It was time to find out if friendship could truly exist between predator and prey. The airlock cycled open with a soft hiss, and Jake stepped into the humid morning air of Kepler 442b. Scout walked beside him, no longer the small injured cub Jake had rescued 2 months ago, but a young predator whose natural instincts were awakening. The moment they emerged from the station, Jake felt the weight of 5 pairs of predatory eyes, focused entirely on him. The pack had arranged themselves in a semicircle around the station's entrance, with the Mother Shadowmaw at the center. She was even more massive than Jake had imagined, easily 12 feet long and built like a living weapon. Her adaptive camouflage flickered between the browns and greens of the forest, and her amber eyes held an intelligence that was both beautiful and terrifying. Scout made a soft calling sound, and his mother's head turned toward him. For a moment, Jake saw something in her expression change, the predatory focus shifting to recognition and what might have been relief. But her attention quickly returned to Jake, and he could see her trying to understand why this small, soft creature was walking beside her young. Jake forced himself to walk slowly and calmly, even though every instinct in his body was screaming at him to run. The other pack members moved closer, their massive forms materializing from the forest edge like living shadows. They were all focused on him now, 5 apex predators who could tear him apart without effort. Scout suddenly broke away from Jake's side and ran toward his mother. The reunion was immediate and emotional, the young predator rubbing against his mother's massive form while making happy purring sounds. The Mother Shadowmaw lowered her head to nuzzle her offspring, and Jake could see the relief and joy in her movements, but then something unexpected happened. Instead of disappearing into the forest with his family, Scout turned back toward Jake. The young predator looked between his mother and the human who had saved his life, and Jake could see confusion in his amber eyes. The Mother Shadowmaw followed her offspring's gaze and studied Jake more carefully. She approached him with slow, measured steps, each footfall making the ground vibrate slightly. Jake stood perfectly still, his heart hammering in his chest. As the massive predator came within arm's reach, she lowered her great head and sniffed him carefully, her nostrils flaring as she took in his scent. Jake could feel her breath on his face, warm and carrying the scent of the wild forest. One wrong move, one sign of threat or fear, and those powerful jaws could end his life in an instant. But Jake didn't move. He stood calmly while the apex predator examined him, trusting in the bond he had formed with Scout, and hoping that the young Shadowmaw's mother would understand that he meant no harm. Scout moved between them, making soft sounds that seemed to be some form of communication. The young predator rubbed against Jake's leg, then against his mother's massive form, as if trying to explain something important. Jake watched in amazement as what appeared to be a conversation took place between mother and offspring. The Mother Shadowmaw pulled back and stared at Jake for a long moment. Then she did something that no human had ever witnessed before. The massive apex predator, capable of crushing steel in her jaws, slowly lowered her head in what could only be interpreted as a gesture of acknowledgement and respect. Jake felt tears welling up in his eyes as he understood what was happening. She knew. Somehow, Scout had communicated to his mother that Jake had saved his life, and she was showing her gratitude in the only way she knew how. "Incredible," he heard Lyra whisper from behind him. The Zephyrian commander had followed him outside, though she had kept her distance and her weapon ready. "In all my years of military service, I have never seen anything like this." The mother Shadow Maw made a series of soft clicking sounds to Scout, and the young predator responded with what sounded like reluctant agreement. Scout approached Jake. One final time, nuzzling against his hand in the gesture of affection that had become so familiar during his recovery, Jake knelt down to Scout's level and scratched behind his ears one last time. "Take care of yourself, buddy," he said softly. "Remember that not everything has to be about hunting and fighting. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is choose to be gentle." Scout purred softly and touched his nose to Jake's forehead. A final gesture of friendship and farewell. Then he turned and walked back to his family, his posture changing as his wild instincts fully awakened. But as the pack began to move toward the forest, the mother Shadow Maw turned back to look at Jake. One more time. Her amber eyes held what appeared to be understanding and acknowledgement. She had witnessed something that challenged everything she knew about the relationship between predator and prey, and Jake could see that she would remember this moment. The pack melted back into the forest as silently as they had appeared, their adaptive camouflage making them invisible within moments. Soon, the only evidence of their presence was the deep tracks they had left in the soft earth around the research station. Jake stood in the clearing for several minutes after they were gone, feeling a mixture of sadness and satisfaction. He had lost a friend, but he had done the right thing. Scout belonged with his own kind, and now he was home where he should be. "How did you know?" Lyra asked, approaching him with obvious amazement. "How did you know the mother would not simply kill you for taking her young?" Jake turned to face her, wiping the tears from his eyes. "I didn't know. I trusted that the bond Scout and I formed meant something, that it would somehow translate to his family." Lyra stared at him for a long moment. "You risked your life on hope, on trust in a creature that could have killed you without thought." "Yes," Jake said simply. "I did. In my culture, such an action would be considered either madness or the highest form of courage," Lyra said slowly. "I am beginning to think it is the latter." They walked back toward the research station in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Jake was thinking about Scout and wondering if he would ever see the young Shadow Maw again. Lyra was thinking about everything she had witnessed, and how it challenged her understanding of strength and survival. That evening, Lyra composed her final report to the Zephyrian High Command. She wrote about the humans she had observed, their capacity for compassion even toward creatures that could destroy them, and their ability to form bonds that transcended the normal rules of predator and prey. "These humans possess a strength we do not understand," she wrote. "They survive not through dominance but through connection. They make allies where we would see only enemies or prey. Any species capable of earning the respect of an apex predator through kindness rather than conquest should not be underestimated." She concluded her report with a recommendation that would change the course of interspecies relations for generations to come. "I recommend full diplomatic alliance with the human species. They have shown qualities that complement our own strengths and may teach us new ways to view the universe." 3 weeks later, the formal alliance treaty was signed in a ceremony aboard the Zephyrian flagship. Lyra specifically requested assignment as the permanent Zephyrian ambassador to human space, a position she would hold for the next 20 years, but the story didn't end there. 6 months after Scout's reunion with his pack, Jake was conducting routine research in the forest when he encountered a familiar figure. Scout had grown even larger, now nearly adult-sized, but he recognized Jake immediately. The young Shadow Maw approached cautiously, his natural wildness warring with his memory of their friendship. But when Jake knelt down and extended his hand, Scout came forward and nuzzled against him, purring with the same deep contentment he had shown during his recovery. From that day forward, Jake's research in the forest was never dangerous. Scout's pack had claimed the territory around the research station, and they watched over the human scientists with protective interest. Other predators learned to avoid the area, not because they feared the humans, but because they feared the apex predators who had chosen to guard them. Years later, when other alien species questioned the wisdom of the Zephyrian-human alliance, Lyra would tell them about the day she watched a human earn the trust of the galaxy's most feared predator, not through dominance but through compassion. It was a lesson that changed not just her perspective, but the entire understanding of what it meant to be truly strong. The research station on Kepler 442b became a symbol of human diplomatic philosophy, the idea that the greatest victories came not from conquest but from understanding. And in the forest around the station, a pack of apex predators continued to watch over the humans who had shown them that strength and kindness were not opposites, but partners in the dance of survival.